elders past, present, and emerging. So we are very lucky today to have Bhante Sanāthāvihārī again, who who was here nearly 8 months ago, I believe, around February or March, but time flies since the last time Bhante was here. So Bhante is now back here again, and this time Bhante will be staying for about 3 months in Sydney. And from today onwards, Bhante will be running the weekly meditation and Buddhist teaching sessions until the 9th of February. So it's good to have you back, Bhante, here. Bhante, so just a little bit about Bhante Sanāthāvihārī. Venerable Sanathavihari is a Mexican-American Theravāda monk at the Sarathchandra Buddhist Center in North Hollywood. He is a student of the late Dr. Bhante Puññaji and the director of Casa De Bhavana, an outreach project to bring the Dhamma to the Spanish-speaking world. He's also the co-author of Buddhism in 10 Steps. He represents a new generation of Spanish-speaking monastics who are extensively employing digital communication methods and social media, which is turning out to be extremely effective for spreading the Dhamma in Spanish. Bhante is also a US Air Force veteran and served in the Army for 9 years. After 3 deployments to Afghanistan, he was ordained as a novice in the Theravada tradition at the age of 30 in the lineage of the Amarapura Nikaya monastic fraternity. Bhante Sanāthāvihārī is also the leader of Casa De Bhavana, a Theravada organization devoted to spreading the Dhamma and promoting the practice of meditation. Bhante has a BA in religion and is a mindfulness researcher at Mount St. Mary University, Los Angeles. Bhante is also has a master's of counseling psychology. So this is all about Bhante Sanāthāvihārī, and without further ado, I'll hand it over to you, Bhante. We would be grateful if you could talk a little bit about meditation, because what makes the Monday sessions a little bit different from the weekly Wednesday sessions is the focus on meditation practice from the Buddhist perspectives. So if you can talk a little bit about it, and then followed by meditation and Dhamma talk, and then we end with the Q&A later on. Yeah. So over to you, Bhante.
Okay, thank you so much, Sensei, for that lovely introduction. It's always weird hearing your own bio. It's kind of, you feel a little bit embarrassed. We need to shorten it up. I think I'll send you a newer version that's shorter. And yeah, just all of that. It's a lot of pressure, I feel like, to keep, to honor all of that. But yes, so we'll start off with a little meditation, and a meditation that I feel that really hits on today's topic of happiness, of being happy here and now, and how the Buddhist path offers us both a kind of mundane happiness, a kind of happiness that we're all familiar with and we want more of, and super mundane happiness, which we don't know about, but the Buddha says that it's really excellent. So I think that for me, one of the most joyful, delightful, even pleasurable, definitely pleasurable practices is the practice of loving kindness meditation. Right? Metta Bhavana. And I think it's perfect because we're at the Metta Center event, right? So keeping with Metta, I think Metta is something that brings us joy. Why does Metta bring us joy? Well, it's recognizing that, other beings also want to be happy just like you want to be. They also want to be healthy. They want to be peaceful. They want all the nice things. So just think about a time where you yourself have had some sort of, maybe you felt in good health, or you felt very successful, or that you achieved something. Or maybe it was just a very calm, relaxing day, and how you felt at that time. And then you can imagine all beings, whether human or non-human, kind of in that kind of situation, right? Where it's just like one of those great days. Today's just good. I feel good, right? And I just feel happy. I feel relaxed, or whatever your version of happiness is. You kind of know that. So metta is just extending that from that one moment that you had in your life to trying to bring that every moment, constantly cultivating it, practicing it. We have this word in Pali called bhavana. It means to cultivate, right? Just like working the land. So you just can't leave the vegetables or plants or whatever you're growing, just put the seed there and walk away. It's the job that you have to keep coming back to and tending to. And even when maybe you don't have to do any physical work, you have to keep all the insects off, or maybe animals from coming and stealing the food, right? So cultivating is an ongoing process. So happiness too is an ongoing process that we have to tend to at all times. That means it's an active practice, right? Loving kindness is an active practice. It's something that we keep going. It's not only something that we do on the cushion sitting down like we're going to do today, or it's not theoretical. Oh yeah, that's very nice. I would like also for everyone to be happy, kind of like a philosophy. It's something that we bring forth every moment. We're constantly generating, like a fire that we need to keep feeding over and over and over again, and wanting to expand that flame or that light, and start including all beings into this kind of circle of happiness and well-being. So I'm going to share with you the way that I learned how to practice it. There's many ways to practice it, you know. And the beautiful thing is that about the way the Buddha taught is that he kind of leaves it open for anyone to practice according to how they want to. But the way that I learned it is through these stages of gradually expanding loving kindness from oneself, from in your body and your mind, and then kind of growing like in these spheres in space, little by little. So in the beginning, we're going to focus on oneself, generating loving kindness for oneself. And you can think, maybe for example, you might think, may I be well, or may I be happy, or may I be peaceful, or may I be safe, right? You can think anything that resonates with you, any word that you feel that works for you. You can say something like that to yourself. May I be well, happy, comfortable, and peaceful. May I be well, happy, comfortable, and peaceful. Or just may I be happy. May I be happy. But we don't want it to become just some sort of like parroting, right? We're not chanting here. We don't just want to be saying things. What we want is we want these words to invoke, to be a catalyst for that state of generating this kind of like positive attitude towards oneself, right? Generating this feeling of loving kindness towards oneself, this goodwill towards oneself, recognizing I deserve to be happy. I deserve to be healthy, recognizing that you are worthy of happiness and good health and all the good things, right? So this method, these words that we're using, like may I be well, happy, comfortable, and peaceful, let's not fall into the trap of just making it like robotic, but try to really pick a word or words that help you touch into that inner happiness, to that inner loving kindness that you have inside of you. And once, you generate some of it, maybe it's just a little flame, maybe a little spark of loving kindness, then we can begin to think of others. We can begin to share this light of loving kindness that we have inside of us with others. And for example, you can begin to think about the people and the beings that are right around you in this place. So if you're in this room here with me, you can think, may all beings in this room be healthy and happy. May all beings in this room be well, happy, comfortable, and peaceful. Or if you're at your house, may all beings in this house be well, happy, comfortable, and peaceful. So you can imagine like a sphere, right, of loving kindness encompassing or filling up this whole room in this like beautiful white cloud of loving kindness, or radiating this light of loving kindness that illuminates the entire room or your entire house, wherever you're at, and extending this feeling of goodwill towards all beings. And we don't want to focus on anyone in particular because, maybe we don't know some people, or maybe we might hold some grudges against some people in our house or in our room. So we just kind of want to think in general, may all beings in this place be well and happy, whether they're human or non-humans, which means like insects and animals, whether we know about them or don't know about them. May all beings without exception be well and happy. So then after we do this, we actually feel the loving kindness that we had inside of us kind of grow and encompass all the beings in the room that we find ourselves in. Then we can extend it to the neighborhood. So you can think around the streets around you, right? The neighborhood around you, the buildings around you, the houses around you. May all beings in this neighborhood be well and happy, right? Radiating loving kindness in all directions, expanding your mind to include all beings. And then from the neighborhood, you can go to the city, and from the city, you can go to the country, and from the country, you can go to the continent or the entire world, and from the world, from the planet, you can go to the entire universe. May all beings throughout the entire universe, whether human or non-human, known or unknown, big or small, be well, happy, comfortable, and peaceful. So radiating loving kindness, right? Sharing loving kindness in all directions, infinitely, throughout the entire universe, encompassing all beings, wherever they might be, throughout the entire universe. And just like any other meditation, you're going to notice that your mind wanders. It happens to the best of us. And when you notice that your mind wanders, just gently, softly bring it back. You know, you don't need to criticize yourself or beat yourself up or say anything about your mind wandering. Just bring it back to the meditation, right? And generate loving kindness again and begin to share it with others. It's just part of the process of our mind wandering and bringing it back and again regenerating this loving kindness. Okay, so now you have the instructions. So let's get nice and comfortable and let's try to have an upright posture, right? Your back has to be kind of straight. It doesn't have to be perfectly straight. We all have different bodies. And if you're at home and you don't feel comfortable sitting on a chair or on a cushion, you can even lay down. Just, be careful not to fall asleep while you're laying down and doing this meditation. So find a comfortable posture, back straight. You can close your eyes or leave them open. But if you leave your eyes open, just gently gaze maybe 2 or 3 feet in front of you and try not to move your vision around. Just slightly gaze in front of you, keeping a fixed view. Or close your eyes and begin with, may I be well, may I be happy. May I be well, may I be happy. And in a few minutes, I'll invite you to come out of this meditation. So let's go ahead and practice in silence for a few minutes, this loving kindness, Metta Bhavana meditation. in all beings throughout the entire universe be well and happy. May all beings be well and happy. Sabbe sattva bhavantu sukhitata. So slowly, gently, you can begin to come out of your meditation. Whenever you're ready, you can open your eyes.
Thank you very much, Bhante Sanāthāvihārī, for the wonderful meditation guidance. I would like to invite the attendees to kindly turn on the cameras if they want to, but no pressure at all, so that we can see that we're talking to real people here. And it's really lovely to see that at the beginning of the session there were only 4 or 5 people, and by the end of the meditation there's suddenly 18 online. So that's nice to see. All right, Bhante, over to you.
Yes, so when I give talks, I like to focus on my personal experience, not too much on theories or what other people have said. And I also like to focus on what I know best, or at least what I think I know best, which is to be joyful and to be happy. I think I was fortunate enough to be born with a kind of joyful, positive temperament. I've been told that by my other siblings who don't share that temperament. They're like, oh, you're so happy all the time, you're so joyful, and they're kind of a little sad or angry people. But I won the lottery on that one, the genetic lottery. But I've been able to further develop my happiness thanks to the Dhamma. And to be very honest, my main defilement my whole entire life has been lobha, which is greed. And I was just talking to Jose here on the way that I was always a pleasure seeker. I was always looking for fun with my friends. I was always the one instigating things to do and making plans. And I was into extreme sports, and I wanted to go dance and listen to music. And I just always wanted to be on this like high. I wanted to be on bliss. I think that's why I went to raves a lot, because you kind of get that feeling, like, that transcending feeling. I love it so much. I've always been chasing that high, most of the time natural high. So yeah. So then when I came to the Dhamma, and the Buddha talked about the ultimate happiness, right? The supreme happiness, bliss of Nibbana. I was like, that's what I've been looking for my whole life, my whole life. And the Buddha, says that, you don't have to pay for it, which is nice. We're used to paying for things. We live in a transactional society. And usually we have to wait for someone else to give it to us. But the Buddha goes, no, it's inside of you. You cultivate it yourself. So you don't have to wait for someone else's permission to be happy. You can be happy by yourself. But that kind of seems very far away for a lot of people, although that was kind of one of my main motivations, like to be awakened, to be enlightened, then I'll have that supreme bliss, that supreme happiness beyond all the heavens. It's unfathomable. You can't imagine it. So that's but when I started reading the suttas, the Buddhist discourses, I started noticing that there is happiness you can have here and now in this very moment. And happiness that arises from the practice that you can get kind of like in between. Okay, so there's like the ultimate happiness of Nibbana. There's like the in between now and Nirvana, the happiness you can get from like doing good actions and the results of your actions and developing your mind. And then there is the right in this moment, your thoughts, your feelings, your body, what comes out of your mouth, what you're doing in this moment, the happiness that can come from directing all of these things in a skillful way. And I was so moved when I heard about the story about the Bodhisattva Prince Siddhartha, after he had practiced all that extreme asceticism, how he tortured his body, he wouldn't eat, he wouldn't drink water, he even tried not to breathe, and he was sleeping out in the elements, and he says that if he would rub his arm, his hair would come off. When he went to the bathroom number 2, he would pass out because he had so little energy that he was about to die. And many times he passed out, and then he woke up like maybe hours later because he was so weak. And then he had a memory about when he was a young boy. It doesn't say how old he was. It says that he was a young boy. And his nannies were supposed to be watching him, but they got caught up in this festival. Everyone was paying attention to the festival, and they kind of left him by himself under the rose apple tree. And he spontaneously went into a meditation state called jhana or dhyana. And he remembered that state when he was a child was very pleasurable. The word is sukha. And then it occurred to him, why was I scared of pleasure? Why was I scared of pleasure? Why was I scared of being happy? There's nothing wrong with being happy, right? I think even nowadays, sometimes, maybe we don't feel that we have permission to feel happy because there's so many bad things going on in the world, right? Or maybe we feel like we didn't reach the goals that we were supposed to, the expectations of our family members. We feel like we don't have permission to be happy. But the Buddha remembered, no, I shouldn't be scared of pleasure. I shouldn't be scared to be happy. It's as long as that happiness is not dependent on sensuality, right? It's a happiness that's not dependent on like eating or sleeping or listening to music, but an inner happiness that you cultivate. He said, he asked himself, he was reflecting, could this be the way to enlightenment, to awakening? And then it occurred to him, perhaps it is. I think it is the way to awakening. So he gave up practicing the asceticisms and he went to go practice on his own. And he developed the method of going through the jhanas, the 4 jhanas, which when you read them are very pleasant. I mean, some of the translations for jhanas are trances or they're states of ecstasy or rapture because they're so powerful. It's such a deep pleasure and happiness and joy and tranquility and relaxation that comes from practicing jhana. So when we look at the Buddhist teachings, he's telling us that the way, the Buddhist path is a path of happiness, right? It's just a different type of happiness, right? It's not a transactional happiness. It's not a sense-based happiness, but it's that inner happiness that we get. He calls it a blameless happiness because it doesn't have any negative consequences, right? A lot of the stuff that we enjoy in the world has negative consequences, right? Maybe not negative consequences in you doing it in that moment, but maybe some negative cause and effect led up to you consuming that, right? So there's so many things that we enjoy in life that, maybe some people were hurt or the planet was destroyed in some way. And those things bring us joy. But the Buddha is offering us something that's independent of that, right? A happiness that has nothing to do with that. And a happiness that doesn't depend on touching, smelling, tasting, or it doesn't come at the cost of you or society or anyone else. So how do we start this, right? How do we start getting into that state? How do we start developing our own happiness? How do we start mining happiness? I think I was only a monk for maybe 3 or 4 years. Back like in 2019 or 18, there was this Mexican lady, and she sent me a message on Facebook, and she made it seem like it was really urgent, something like she needed help right away. So I answered real quickly. Usually I kind of leave it to answer those messages when I have free time, but it just sounded really urgent. And I read it and I asked her what was going on. And she said that, she's been practicing meditation and she goes to the temple and she reads books, but she just can't stop thinking. She's like, I'm always thinking. And it's just bothering me every day. I just feel so stressed out just from all the thoughts that are going on in my head. And then she asked me, Bhante, how can I stop thinking? I want to stop thinking because it's bothering me so much. So then I told her, imagine this situation. And actually, this whole conversation was happening in Spanish, you know? So I'm like I'm translating it into English and I'm paraphrasing. I said, imagine if from the moment that you woke up to the moment that you went to sleep, you were thinking only thoughts of loving kindness and compassion, of sharing and caring for others, about tending for others, about helping others. Do you think you would have messaged me today on Facebook? She said, no, Bhante. I said, why not? That's a lot of thinking to be doing. You're thinking so much. Well, that's true, Bhante, but those are nice thoughts. Oh, okay, okay. So it's not about stopping your thinking, right? It's not about lobotomizing yourself, but about what you think about, how we think, right? If we think in kind of a negative way, of course, we're going to feel sad. Of course, we're going to feel pain. But if we develop altruistic thoughts, selfless thoughts, thoughts of compassion and loving kindness, generous thoughts, you're going to feel happy. You know, a lot of people feel happy just having the thought about doing something nice for someone. Think about someone that you care, and then you get an idea. Oh, you know what? I know they like that pastry, or I know they like that coffee. I'm gonna take it to them. Just when you have that thought, you get happy, right? You haven't even done it, and you already feel happy. Right here and now, here, right in this moment. Maybe even when you were just entertaining what I was telling you, maybe you felt some happiness. Maybe you remembered someone, and you remembered or you thought about some time where you did that. So we know, you see for yourself now that you can be happy in this very moment by doing what the Buddha said. Where did the Buddha tell us to do this? Well, actually, there's a sutta in the Majjhima Nikaya called the Middle Length Discourses. It's called the Dvaita Vitakka Sutta. Two types of thoughts. Dvaita, Vitakka. Dvaita is two types, and Vitakka is thoughts. And here the Buddha says, before I was a Buddha, when I was just a regular person, I ran an experiment. I said, what happens if I think about thoughts, greedy thoughts, angry thoughts, and violent thoughts? So he sat down and he meditated on greed, anger, and violence. You know, so the Buddha was kind of like experimenting. He didn't know where to go. He didn't really have a teacher. So he tried it out, and he noticed that he just felt worse. He's like, I just felt miserable. Things did not get better. This did not work, right? Sometimes we think if we have fantasies about revenge, or, you know, some sensual fantasies about getting the object of our desires, we're going to feel better. But your desire for that thing doesn't get quenched by thinking like that, right? It doesn't go away. And if anything, you just feel more of an urge, like, oh, I wish I could do it. I wish I could punch that person, right? Or I wish I could have that and taste it now. It just makes you feel worse. It doesn't solve the problem if we entertain those thoughts. So the Buddha said, no, that's not the way. Push it to the side. I'm not going to do that. And then he ran another experiment. He says, okay, now I'm going to think thoughts of renunciation, letting go. I'm going to think thoughts of loving kindness and thoughts of compassion. Let's see what happens. So he started meditating. And he noticed, actually, my mind is improving. I'm feeling a lot better thinking this way. What if I would only think this way? If this was the only type of thinking I would have? So then he does it. And he said, oh, my mind became so pure, it became so calm. And after some time, it became so calm that I didn't even have to think. I let go of the thoughts. Because even focusing on the thoughts, kind of, even though it felt good, it kind of became like a disturbance, doing it, like actively doing it. He just sat in that kind of calm state that arose from developing kind and compassionate thoughts. And then it says that he went into the first jhana. It goes, and from there, I went into and I abided in the first jhana, which is those deeper levels of meditations for you that are not familiar with it, right? So here we see that the Buddha started off by thinking happy thoughts, wholesome thoughts, compassionate thoughts, thoughts of loving kindness. And in that moment, when he was thinking those thoughts, he saw the benefits, just like you did, right? And then he just kept thinking those thoughts, and he saw kind of more longer term benefits throughout that day and throughout the time that he was running this experiment. And eventually, those thoughts led his mind to be so calm, so tranquil, that he was able to go into these supreme, kind of very deep level of happiness called jhana. And to be honest, for most of us, that jhana will be kind of more like the medium point happiness. Maybe we're not going to get it right away, right? It's going to take some practice to get there. So there's the happiness of here and now, of just thinking about those thoughts. The happiness that might happen in a few weeks, a few months, and a few years if you keep practicing of jhana. And then he said he went through the first jhana, second jhana, third jhana, fourth jhana, and then he went through all the jhanas. And by going through this, through all the jhanas, kind of goes up and down and then back up. He was able then to see things how they really are. He was able to see impermanence, unsatisfactoriness, and non-self. And then he reached nirvana, awakening, enlightenment. And at that level, he got the highest happiness, which the Buddha said, Nibbānam paramam sukham, that nirvana is the supreme happiness, the highest happiness of all. So right in the very beginning, when we just start creating this intention, this motivation, right? We change our perspective of the world. We start thinking these wholesome thoughts. In that moment, like you figured out, like you saw for yourself when I gave you that little example, you felt happy. If you continue it, you're going to continue feeling happy. And if you deepen that kind of practice of cultivating wholesome thoughts, it will lead you into these kind of transcendental, blameless happiness that the Buddha was talking about. His first memory, when I shared with you his first memory, he said, when I was a little boy, I went into jhana. That's the kind of happiness that he said that was blameless, transcendental, that doesn't have to do anything with sensuality. And then from that happiness, you can eventually reach the supreme, unperturbable happiness where you no longer will feel any suffering and you can no longer go backwards. And from there on, it will be nothing but happiness forever, right? So Buddha offers us happiness here and now, happiness throughout our lives, in the next lives, and at the end of this whole cycle of samsara when we free ourselves. But thinking is not enough. Thinking is not enough. Thinking is powerful, as you can see, because it brought that happiness right now. But thinking also leads to other things. Thinking has results. If we begin to think in a certain way, we're going to start speaking in a certain way, right? So imagine if you were to see somebody, and you just start complimenting them, right? Oh, that's very nice of you. Oh, you look so good today. I'm so happy to see you today. You have a mind that's already inclined to loving kindness and compassion and to sharing. You start speaking like that. Even when you start speaking like that, that makes you feel good too, right? When you compliment people, when you're nice to people. Just think about when people do that to you. How do you feel, right? When you say that, you also feel nice. If it's sincere, right? If you're lying, if you don't have the thought, if your thought is actually like, I hate this person. Oh yeah, you're very beautiful. Then it's not going to work. But that's why we have to start with the thought first, I told you. Then those thoughts will change the way you speak. But then speaking is not enough, because then you actually want to go do that nice thing that I told you for that person in the beginning, right? You're thinking about, oh, I should get that for that person. It makes you feel good. I'm actually going to go actually do it for that person. And when you actually do it and you see that you did something nice for them, you feel so good. And then even at some later point in life, you might remember, oh, I remember I did that one thing for my best friend. I did that thing for my mom. Such a good memory. And you feel good again, right? So it keeps bringing happiness over and over and over and over again. The thought, our speech, our actions, it just keeps bringing happiness. And on most occasions, when we start being nice to people and start being kind, most people will reciprocate, right? So you won't only get the happiness of thinking about it, of feeling good in your mind, saying it and doing it, but also you'll get the happiness of people kind of like paying it forward and then also doing it for you. So then there's another benefit. And this is just another way of talking about karma and vipaka, which is actions and results, right? The Buddha says that if we do wholesome actions, then we get wholesome results. If we do unwholesome actions, we get unwholesome results. And the Buddha said there's three types of actions. There's like cognitive actions, what we constantly think about, not the random thoughts that come into your mind, but the thoughts that you brew on and you kind of bring over and over and over again and you reflect on. Then there's the karma of our speech, what we say to people and ourselves, right? Be very careful what you tell yourself. Sometimes we beat ourselves up verbally more than anyone else could. So we need to be very careful. The compassion also has to be inner compassion, not only outside. And then there's the physical karma, which is very obvious, right? helping people, treating people nice, or like punching them and harming them or robbing them. Those are not things that we should do, right? So these are the three types of actions that we can do to bring about happiness. And when we do these actions, in the very moment that we do something wholesome, we experience the happiness in that very moment. And we will also experience the results of that wholesome action sometime later in this life, the Buddha said, or in a future life. And then those wholesome actions, those wholesome states, are like fertilizer that enrich the soil for awakening. So the more we do this, the richer the soil becomes, and the faster and more likely it is that the seeds of awakening are going to start growing and finally give fruit until we reach awakening. So for me, at least, when I read the teachings of the Buddha, I just see it like a party. It's just a party all the way. And it's a party where, it doesn't cost you any money. You're not going to have a hangover. There's not going to be any fights like there is at the pubs or anything like that. It's a great party because there's no negative consequences to it, right? Maybe there's you need to develop patience for this party. Maybe that's a little bit difficult for some of us. We need to learn to let go. Right? It's a party that requires a lot of letting go. So that might be an obstacle for us too, right? It's a party that does require some tolerance sometimes of discomfort, right? Because physical discomfort while we're doing some of these practices. It's a party that requires maybe us to do some learning, and learning can be uncomfortable, especially in the beginning when we don't really know what to do. It's hard to kind of grasp these concepts, or kind of hard to do the practice. When you first start a meditation practice, I felt like a clown. I have no idea what I'm doing here. I felt like an imposter sitting there. But then once I was able to kind of just get the ball rolling, once I got some momentum, then meditation became a lot easier. So there's those difficulties, and this is kind of like the price you pay to join this party. But I think it's still very affordable admission compared to other things, and less negative consequences. So yeah, these are just a few words of Dhamma, a few examples that I know for myself have worked for me, and that I have seen for myself in the teachings of the Buddha. And I just wanted to share with you that with you today. And I want to now go to my favorite part, which is the Dhamma discussion, the Q&A. That's my favorite part. I like interacting with people. I don't see myself as a preacher or a professor, like up here saying things. I like to, go back and forth, because when you read the suttas, the Buddha's always talking to people. He's not like, going into a classroom, okay, Four Noble Truths, Noble Truth of Suffering, Noble Truth, like he's not doing that. He's like, oh, what happened? Oh, you lost your daughter? Okay, let me help you with that, right? The Buddha's engaging people with their problems. He's not professing, he's not preaching. So I would like to try to, in my own humble way, follow in the Buddha's footsteps and get to my favorite part now of the Q&A.
Well, thank you, Bhante. I was just going to say, it reminded me, when you said that, you reminded me of the interaction between the Buddha and the many people in the suttas, and the teaching, came alive through that interaction and conversation. So thank you so much, Bhante, for sharing your words of wisdom today. So anybody who has any questions, feel free to put your question in the chat box, or you can also put your hands up and then you can ask the question verbally as well.
Yes, in the back.
Okay. So
Yeah, I think Eddie, you have a question, don't you, Eddie? Would you like to just ask the question verbally, or do you want to put it in the chat and I can read it out?
I think the live audience can go first.
Okay. All right. Okay.
yeah.
I didn't see that. Sorry.
Yeah, here in the live audience.
So thank you for your talking today. So what is synchronicity? Recently, I have been reading Practicing Jhana from Stephen Snyder.
Mhm.
And there's a very renowned Burmese monk called Pao Sider.
Pao?
Yeah.
Yeah, Pao.
Oh, Pao. Okay. So, and so one of the person told me, do you know what is jhana? So he suggested this book.
Mhm.
Also from Pali Sutra and several sutras, Buddha was talking about jhana.
Mhm.
Can you tell us about how to achieve this impossible immaterial stage of jhana and your experiences?
So the question was about jhana. What is it and how to get into jhana? So I kind of answered it, right? In my little talk,
I
right?
just want to hear, this mystical stuff.
Yeah. So one of the things that's very clear over and over and over again, the Buddha tells us that seclusion is required for jhana, right? Seclusion, to get away from all the distractions, to get away from, especially noise. He says noise is a big hindrance for getting, especially hearing people's voices or hearing the sounds of the town and the village. Maybe not so much in nature, the natural sounds, but so we need to practice seclusion. We're drawing from sensuality, and that will help the mind naturally become calm, right? And then there's the other part that I told you earlier about changing the narrative or changing the story in the head, right? Changing the contents that arise in the mind, changing the way we think. And then for that, we also need to develop a certain level of mindfulness, right? That in every moment we have that mindfulness, because that mindfulness is going to help us be aware of when unwholesome states arise. And then if we can catch them as soon as they arise, then we can get rid of them as soon as they arise, right? Sometimes a minute or 2 or 3 minutes later, we realize that we're in some fantasy about like, oh yeah, it would be nice to be in Bali and you're supposed to be meditating, right? But you lost 5 minutes of that meditation. So at that time, your mind started going away from jhana and going towards just regular stuff, right? So sati also helps us with that. And then by cultivating, keeping our mindfulness inside, like on the body, on the feelings, on the mind, and on the dhammas, the phenomena, then we don't give an opportunity for anything from the outside to like even come in or arise to begin with, right? So first we develop this kind of mindfulness and good thinking to kind of notice when unwholesome thoughts arise so we can remove them. Not only that, we develop it so deep that unwholesome states themselves stop to arise. They don't even arise anymore, right? So then your mind becomes very calm and joyful. Your body becomes relaxed. Even the Buddha says that you feel like physical comfort. And it's when you're in that state, right, of a very kind of a stable state and fixed state of that, that automatically the mind will go into this deeper state, right? So it's not like you actually have to like force yourself into it or do anything. It's just about letting go more, right? The more you let go, the closer you are. And the more like you grasp or try to grab something, you start heading away from the jhana.
I noticed this inner smile in me towards some deeper stage. Yes, like you said. What about your personal experiences? My
personal experiences?
The deeper ones.
So there's certain rules that monks can't talk about.
What is that?
The jhana, but I would say when I have practiced more seclusion, basically when I'm by myself and I've practiced in outside of the city, that's really worked. Yeah, I found those times to be the best times. So I think that's why the Buddha puts so much emphasis on seclusion. Because even if you find a nice quiet place in the city, you're still kind of thinking like, oh, outside, there's like the drive-through and there's other things around or my phone. The mind will still kind of have that there. But if you completely remove yourself from those kind of things, it's like out of sight, out of mind, you're away. You can't even, if you go to a place where there's no reception, your phone doesn't have a signal, then it's even better. But my own personal advice would be like, don't do it by yourself. Go to like a meditation center or have like a teacher, someone who has experience. Don't just rent, some cabin out in the woods and try it on your own, because there is accounts even in the discourses where a lot of fear arises in people. Some people even kind of like they go mad being isolated like that, right? Or who knows what can arise in your mind during that time, right? Especially if you've had some previous negative experiences in the past, right? Like trauma, or maybe you have some mental disorder. You want to be more careful if you're by yourself. And then, so it's to be done with, your own discretion and with a lot of, proceed with caution. Always better to be with a teacher. So it's good that you're reading these books and informing yourself. And if you would like to try it, just do it in a place that supports that practice.
Thank you, Bhante. And Eddie, I think you have a question.
Thank you, Bhante, and thank you, Sinsin. Bhante, you mentioned about how giving to someone actually can make us feel better and our mind filled with joy and stuff like that. To be honest, in my own experience, I feel like I think about giving someone joy mostly because these people are closer to me, matters to me, like my family or friends or someone I like. And towards other people who I really don't know, or just some stranger or stuff, I feel like I don't really have that stronger sincerity. So in your own experience, how did you feel your metta at the beginning of your practice to these recent years? I mean, how did you make it more and more sincere so that you don't do the metta because of some guidance or because of you have to, but it comes as something automatic and you just enjoy it and it becomes your habit? I would like to hear from your side. Thank you.
Thank you for that question, because to be very honest, I struggled with metta in the beginning. I was just very focused on mindfulness practice, like satipatthana, vipassana, because, I was like, oh, the Buddha said this is the way, the direct path to awakening. And I thought, oh, like the Brahma Viharas, like metta, karuna, mudita, upekkha, and like dana, these are like lower practices, right? Like these are other things. And I felt it was kind of like, that's too fluffy, too squishy, that's like too soft, kind of new agey. I was like, I don't want to do that. But my teachers kept bringing up loving kindness. And in my teacher's book, he kept bringing up the Brahma Viharas. And then when I read the suttas, I saw them appear over and over and over again. And the Buddha says, even like when a monk wakes up in the morning, he shouldn't think what he wants to do that morning. He should ask the other monks what they want to do that morning. And he should do what they want to do instead of doing what he wants to do. And he should generate thoughts of loving kindness and compassion outwardly and inwardly towards his companions. And I was like, it's there all the time. So it became obvious to me that I needed to get over that. And I needed to practice more loving kindness, because to me, it just seemed like a lower practice or something like very, it didn't seem serious enough, right? It didn't seem like very serious Buddhist practice. So luckily enough, I was around a lot of people who I was able to maybe support them in what they were doing, right? Or support them during difficult times. And I feel like that's one of the benefits of being a monastic, that people come to you with all their problems, So you have a lot of opportunities to be compassionate and, to listen and to be kind to people and nice. And especially when you see how some people are really negative about themselves, how they think so low about themselves, such low self-esteem, how they beat themselves up, that compassion just arises in you. Like you feel it, like it's not necessary. You don't have to be that tough on yourself. Like, why are you doing that? You don't say that to them, but inside of your mind, you're thinking that. So I think these opportunities of seeing the suffering right in front of me, and people coming to me for compassion and loving kindness, and then seeing my teachers keep pushing loving kindness and reading in the suttas. All these things came together, right? And it supported me in focusing more on metta practice. And then there was a couple of years, almost like 2 years, where my primary practice was loving kindness, metta. And I left behind like the more like mindfulness, vipassana practices to the side. That became my secondary practice. And then I started focusing more also on doing more community service as a monk. So now actually about 50% of everything that I do is outward towards like the community and helping people. So it's not only about thinking loving kindness. It's not only about practicing loving kindness meditation, but it's about actually doing it and creating that habit, right? And maybe getting out of your comfort zone. And just being out of your comfort zone, you'll come in contact with the regular world, and you'll see like all the suffering that there is out there. And the natural response inside of you is going to be, whoa, like I wish this wouldn't happen to this person, I wish they can come out of it. So the more you feel this, it just kind of, you start building it up more and more. And then you'll reach a level where you wake up one day and you're like, oh, wow, like I just have this now, right? It's kind of like if you study a language, or if you're learning a new sport. In the beginning, you kind of look silly. You don't know what you're doing. But then over 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, then you become like fluent in that language, or you become very skillful in that sport. So it just takes time of putting in the time, right? And doing it over and over again. And in the same way that you need to show up to the gym to get gains, you need to show up to your practice of loving kindness to get the loving kindness gains. If you don't show up for Metta, Metta's not going to show up for you. So we need to be active in the beginning, I said, right? It's an active practice. We need to do something. That's why it's called bhavana, right? Bhavana means to cultivate, like working the soil, bringing into being. Bhava is like existence arising, and na is like to keep doing. So it's just about continuous practice. Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Bhante.
Yes.
Thank you, Eddie, for asking that question, and I think I could relate to that question a lot. So thanks for asking that question. Bhante, we have a question online, but before I read out the question in the chats, there is actually a question from our friend Simran. Simran would like to ask a question verbally. So let's listen to Simran first, and then I'm going to read out the next question in the chats. Simran?
Thank you, Sinsin, and hello, Bhante. My question relates to something that you touched on, and you sort of said that it was about, you said 50% was sort of outward that you're sort of doing now. And my question was about how to balance doing those things for other people and being within the normal world with then this sort of almost requirement for seclusion to obtain the jhanas, because what I've personally found is the more that I meditate, I've become quite sensitive to the world, and then it might like it sort of hinders my ability a little bit to experience that happiness. So for example, I don't watch television, but my family does, and so I'll just be sitting there eating. And today, for example, on the news they're watching something about somebody being beat up and brutally, I'll just say, murdered. And, for me, I feel like, I just feel this overwhelming sense of sadness because I can really relate and think to that. And I think, well, then I struggle to feel sort of happiness, or even if I think, oh, I hope they're better. Well, like they're not going to be better, like they've passed. So I don't really know how to find happiness sometimes in the normal world where I see things that sort of don't align, that aren't wholesome.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so to be very honest, in the beginning, it's just hard. It's just very hard. And I struggled a lot too. I remember, because I use public transportation a lot, because I live in the city in Los Angeles, and I would hear people's conversations about like having problems with their family, or not having enough money, or using drugs, or someone's in jail. And I would almost fall into despair. Like I felt hopeless, and I would feel really bad. And then sometimes even my eyes would get watery, and I'm just sitting there in the bus. I just felt so much pain. But at some point, after, many years of practice, I feel like there was this spaciousness that kind of developed in my mind, right? So even where like all this junk came in, all this suffering, before I would feel like very claustrophobic, like very tight, and I would feel like my mind has nowhere to go, and it would just get stuck on the suffering. I felt like now my mind got so big that all this suffering arises, but there's still plenty of space for my mind to breathe, even though all that suffering's there. So I can hold all of that, but at the same time, have that spaciousness or clarity, so where I'm not like suffocated by all those things. But I think that just came from years of practice. I don't think I have any shortcuts or tips or tricks for that. And then I think we also have to use our own wisdom to know where we're at, and not like you're doing, try to kind of like, in the beginning, we need to kind of do more seclusion, right? Until we build up that capacity to be able to do that. Because it's only been in these last, like after COVID, where I've really done more community work, and then I started practicing, it's been like 6 years before that, of like monastic or semi-monastic practice before I got to that level where I could be able to tolerate and be up with all of that. So that's why I also like to focus on inner compassion and inner loving kindness, right? And and developing to the same extent that we do for others, for ourselves. And if we kind of have the surplus of loving kindness, then we can use that surplus and to help us when we face the suffering that's outside. But if our tank's very low, then yeah, it's probably best not for you even to go out there, because it just, you might become like, I don't have a better way to say it right now, maybe there's a better way, but like a liability, right? Something like that, you know? So in the beginning, we just need to be more careful. And even though we have good intentions, we might need to focus more on ourselves in the beginning, on our own practice.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Bhante.
Bhante.
Thank you, Simran. Also, I was going to ask that question, but and I wanted to make a short comment here, but this is not really in response to your question, Simran. It's something that I was reminded of, so I thought I might just share this as well. I used to think sometimes that there is this big distinction between seclusion and community work, and because I thought, like, how can you sort of marry the two together? But in my own experience, sometimes having attended a couple of retreats, often, for example, Bhante Sujata or Ajahn Brahmali advised us to really focus on ethics and be good, and then really cultivate, rejoice in the goodness that we have done. And we can't really save everybody, but then, if we actually do our bit to really help others as much as possible, we contemplate on that, joy arises, and somehow that creates a spaciousness in our heart and in my heart. And that has actually worked as well a few times on retreats when I felt like, oh, actually now there's the bit that the tranquility and the seclusion that I experience in my heart, that arises from thinking about the good deeds that we have committed. I'm not sure if I'm making sense and whether I'm saying the right thing, Bhante, but this is just based on my own experience. Somehow the seclusion arises because of the rejoicing in the good deeds that I have done, and rejoicing in the goodness that I have shared with others, and the goodness that others have shared with me. There's that collective kindness, and that leads to somehow better meditation or seclusion and tranquility. Yeah, that's just my comment. And Bhante, just before, I would like to also read out one of the questions that was posted earlier online. So the question is this: Bhante, do you believe that people with mental illness can attain jhanas, as they have so many obstacles and things to be wary about, with things like seclusion and mindfulness can trigger negative states? So is it possible for them? And do you know of any monk or nun who has overcome a severe condition?
I think it's possible. I don't see anything in the suttas that would indicate that someone cannot. Actually, we have a lot of cases of very weird people in the suttas becoming arahats. We have mass murderers. We have one person who had like bad memory, couldn't even remember a few lines of the chanting. His brother was going to kick him out from being a monk because he was embarrassing him. So we see people with like cognitive problems and like mood problems in the suttas, and they're able to get some benefit from the practice, and some of them even became arahants. You just need to be more careful. That's my own personal experience. And also, really talk to your mental health professional, whoever you're working with, before you try anything new, and kind of keep them in the loop. So I think that's just like an extra person that you need to keep in the loop. Don't overinvest in Buddhism or your Buddhist teacher or whoever's reading the retreat. We have to, sometimes we're tempted to kind of go all spiritual. And I think that's not a good choice. I actually wrote an article about it a few years ago, about that, we need monastics and other people in spiritual circles need to be more conscious about mental health disorders and people's vulnerabilities, and that we need to have these conversations more in meditation circles and not try to do like a spiritual bypass when we come here. So I think it's just about being more careful, being very honest about wherever you're at in your practice, and just staying safe. Just stay safe, please. Yeah.
Thank you, Bhante. And there is another question which is kind of related to what had been asked before. Sorry, I've lost track. Just one second. I admire Tina and other people who do this regularly and can keep track of everything. I can barely do this. Yes, I can actually. So, all right, I found it. So, how do you become supportive and compassionate to people who are feeling negative or going through a rough time without it impacting our own energy and generating negative thoughts for yourself? And, I was also going to touch on this with regard to compassion fatigue, for example, and regarding what you do, Bhante, especially when you have to listen attentively to people who keep sharing their problems with you, and you also need to remain objective sometimes and maybe maintain some kind of distance between you and the person. But of course, we're human beings and we need to show empathy and relate to them. How do you navigate through this so that it doesn't affect your own mental health, so to speak, so that it doesn't really overwhelm you?
Yeah, I actually don't believe that there's such a thing as compassion fatigue. I know what people are trying to say. I know what they're trying to say, but I don't think if we would stick to like a strict definition of what karuna is in Buddhism, compassion, it doesn't apply. I think what happens is not that people, they stop being compassionate and they run out of compassion, right? But is that people get tired of not seeing results, right? People get exhausted from not seeing change. That's what's really happening, right? So there's like a sense of frustration, of powerlessness, of exhaustion. You put in so much effort and energy. That's the kind of thing. So right from the very beginning, no expectations. You have to start already like that. I cannot save one. The Buddha said only people can change themselves. Only one can save themselves. There's no refuge outside of oneself, right? So we already have to come into that interaction thinking, my job here is just to be with this person, right? To hold the space with them, to show empathy, right? To show compassion. I'm not here to help. I'm not here to change. I'm not here to fix. I'm not the hero. I'm not the savior. And I'm definitely not the martyr, right? That's not what we're doing. I'm here so you're not alone. I'll be here with you during this difficult time. I'll hold your hand so you don't have to go through this pain alone. That I feel like is the practice of supporting others. Everything else is you not being able to tolerate the suffering in front of you. You want to get rid of your own suffering, so try to change the situation, right? So sometimes we get confused whose pain we're reacting to. We think it's their pain and we want to make them feel better, but it's actually our pain and we want to make ourselves feel better because we can't tolerate their pain. So we need to be very careful. So from the very beginning, start off with, I'm just here for you. That's it. I can't do anything. Just only be here.
I love that answer.
Yeah, we were talking about, being a true listener. Like I think Nicola spoke a few weeks ago, and she emphasized this as well in her work with people who are terminally ill. And yeah, any other questions that you would like to ask? Maybe live audience?
Yes, in the live audience.
Yeah.
Bhante, how, personally, I found, because I think you started your talk and I heard your talk on, I think it was Saturday as well. Saturday or Sunday, I think you gave it.
Oh, at the Vihara?
Yes, yeah, I read it online. And I think you mentioned like, this is the hindrance that, lobha, right?
Yes, lobha.
Yeah. So then, I was sort of thinking, okay, I should think more about, what are the main hindrances for me that arise when I meditate that I think, affect me the most. And definitely, I would say like in the last 3-4 years, I've had a lot of changes in my life. Like, I was married, my marriage ended. I had a job, I lost that job to change careers and things. So when I sit down and I close my eyes and I meditate, and even during the course of the day, I get a lot of, I guess, restlessness and remorse. So my mind often goes to the past and thinks, why did that turn out that way? Or, oh, why did I do it this way? If I had only seen how it would go, I could have changed it there. I could have said this differently, done that differently. And then similarly, and it's so like the first time that I, whilst being born a Buddhist, because I'm Sri Lankan, never really came to this stuff until probably 3-4 years ago, right? It's a very common story, I think. And I really read this, in English, in a language I actually understand. And I saw that combination of restlessness and remorse, and I was like, God, that's me. I get that exactly, even to this day, probably to this very moment. And so my mind also goes to the future, and and I worry, like, oh no, like all that stuff happened, and I'm okay, like I've got a great job, fine. But I think, oh no, like, how will this turn out? And so that combination of going to the past, going to the future. How do you have any ways through your experience or through your understanding of the Dhamma of how you can, and I've asked other monastics about this too, and they've given me some tips, I guess. What would you say can help you to deal with that particular hindrance of stopping your mind of thoughts of the past, regrets and remorse arising, and then also anxieties about the future and how things are going to end up, how your career is going to end up, what's going to happen next year, what's going to happen the year after, etc. How do you find, or is there a way to remain more? And because I appreciate and know how important it is to, and every time I do find some peace, it's because I can just say, okay, forget about all that. I'm just here now, just with my breath. Or even, I'm at work. This is just the task I'm going to think about right now. Forget about all that stuff before. Forget about what will happen tomorrow or whatever. Do you have any tips of how to remain in the present to address that hindrance?
Yes. So I'll give you what the stock answer is from the Buddha, and also I found it very useful. Yes. But I've also found some other things very useful too in my own experience.
Yes.
So what the Buddha says, the remedy for like Buddha Chikukucha, right?
Yes.
Is mindfulness, like right now, present moment, especially body, kaya anupassana, being very in touch with the body right now, what's happening with the body, right? But for some of us, our mind is just so habituated to time travel, right?
Yes.
It's just always time traveling. Okay, mind wants to time travel. Let's see what we can do with that. The mind's already doing that. How can we see time traveling, have a different relationship to the time traveling mind, right? So for me, I'll give you my example. Mine was always to go towards lust and experiences and sensuality, right? And I'm still very much like that. But I knew this was my tendency, so I just changed the goal, right? I said, okay, I want things, but now I want like jhana, I want nibbana, like I want, these things, because my mind's naturally inclined to trying to go get things, right? So I just kind of redirected it, and now this pattern's kind of working for me more than against me. Obviously, I have to change this pattern too, right, of grasping and going towards things. But now it's kind of being redirected in a more skillful way, right? So if your mind is traveling and is doing that all the time, you can't erase these memories that you had they actually happened, right? Yeah. So it wouldn't do us any good to kind of deny it, because you probably learned some things from it too. Yeah. So we don't want to erase those memories. And it's giving you important information about the past that you can leverage for the future. But what's our relationship to it, right? Right now, there might be a negative relationship to it, right? Criticism. Why didn't I do it this way? I could have done it that way. Maybe we can have a compassionate relationship to the past, right? We can see like, oh, at that time I wasn't ready. That's okay. It's okay that I wasn't ready. Oh, I made that mistake. What would I have told one of my friends if they made that same mistake? Oh, I would have told them not to worry about it. I'd be compassionate towards them, right? So if the mind time travels, let it time travel, right? But instead of having a critical negative perspective on the past or the future, we just change the story about the past and the future. We can always change the past. We can change how we see the past. It happens to most people naturally. There's like studies that show that as people get older, they tend to have a more positive look of their childhood in the past than was actually true. It's just something naturally that the mind does. So we can leverage this kind of knowledge or tendency of the mind to maybe to do it when we're a little bit younger. And so I think here, what And where I really learned how to do this, like a technique, there's a thing called compassion-focused therapy. And right there, they really focus on kind of changing our relationship to things that happen. And it really helped people who have self-criticism. And also I've seen that it's been useful for people that have self-criticism due to like past trauma or failures, you know, negative experiences, even negative childhood experiences. So just, you know, maybe we're not interested in going the psychological way, but I think the compassion part of it, right? The first letter, compassion-focused therapy. Let's focus on compassion. Let's focus on a compassionate perspective in relationship to what happened in the past, and treat your past self or your future or your present self and your future self like you would treat a friend who was in that same situation. And most likely you'd be like, hey, buddy, you know, like, okay, it's okay. You know, like we can try to move forward and you'd be a lot nicer. So we need as I said earlier, we need to practice compassion inwardly to the same degree that we practice it outwardly. And I think once we start doing that, we can work with these problems or work with whatever's going on, whatever hindrance in our mind because with that compassionate perspective, those thoughts will become more tolerable. They'll become softer. That means they'll become like starting like calming. And once they calm, then eventually they'll dissipate too, right? So instead of like trying to like force them out, we just kind of like wait, like try to tire them out, you know, and let them like fade away slowly. But we need to change our relationship to those thoughts instead of trying to get rid of the thoughts right away. Yes.
Thank you, Ban. I feel like quite a few people have been asking the questions that I wanted to ask. So it feels like everybody could read my mind, or maybe it's just that everyone seems to have the same problems without us mentioning it, perhaps. Maybe that's the reason why. Shireen also has a question here. Shireen, would you like to ask the question verbally, or do you want me to read it out? Okay, I'll read it out, I guess. That's the reason why you put it in the chats, I guess. So, Bhante, my question is for mom and dad who are relatively new to meditation since starting to listen to Dhamma talks on a regular basis. Also, due to mobility concerns, mom and dad can only do meditation at home and not attend retreats or be in seclusion. So after going through 2 surgeries in a year, mom also constantly worries about everything. For example, will she be able to walk without aid, or will she be able to drive again? So mom and dad are listening in on this session. Bhante, please share your wisdom and advice for mom and dad.
So I'll share with you another meditation that was difficult for me because I didn't feel inclined to do it in the beginning, which was Buddha Nusati, right? Reflecting or thinking about the Buddha, the qualities of the Buddha, right? And I only came to it because I saw the power it had in the Sri Lankan community. I saw all like the grandmas and the aunties just focusing on the Buddha so much. And I would see how happy they were, right? And how motivated. And it moved them to practice like more giving and to keep the precepts and to study more and to come to the temple and to do all these things. And it gave them a peace of mind, you know, because I would go to a lot of these people's deathbeds in their homes or in the hospitals. And I was expecting to do some counseling. But these older Sri Lankan ladies were like, no, it's okay. You know, I practice the Dhamma. The Buddha will protect me. You know, like, I'll be fine. I was like, oh, wow. Like, you know, I don't have a job, you know, here to do. I just came to visit. Okay, very nice. So I kept seeing the power of faith, of saddha that arises from the practice of Buddha Nusati. And to be honest, most Buddhists throughout history have had a strong faith practice in thinking about the Buddha. That has been the primary meditation of most people, right? To think about the Buddha. Maybe in the West or in modern days, that's not been the popular practice, right? But I have for myself seen the results in other people and in my own mind. And I was just talking about Sinsen the other day about how I listen now even to like different traditions and different languages of how they practice thinking about the Buddha. You know, like from the Tibetan tradition, there's a Amitayus one that I listen to that's very nice that helps me think about the Buddha. From the Mahayana Vietnamese tradition, there's one where they think also about Amitabha Buddha. That I really brings in that saddha and that conviction, and that my mind becomes very pure in those moments. When I see myself thinking about the Buddha, and I have faith in the Buddha, there's no anger, there's no greed, there's no worry, there's no laziness, there's no doubt. My mind is so serene and I feel so good, right? So I think that's something, especially for more like traditional people, right? Or older people, or, there's certain groups of people that this kind of like faith practice and thinking about the Buddha's qualities just naturally makes it easier for them to do that type of meditation. So yeah, I don't think, necessarily everyone needs to do like a hardcore vipassana like I tried in the beginning. I mean, even to me now, I learned that that's not the only way, and I should practice loving kindness and other practices. So I think that maybe meditation is just going to look different for them, and that's okay. And I think meditation is going to look different for all of us here. You should use your wisdom to see what works. Don't force something to work if it's not working, Don't be stubborn. Be very humble. And if it doesn't work for you, it doesn't work, and try another meditation. There's so many meditations to do. There's like kasinas, there's Brahma Viharas, there's jhanas, there's Arupa jhanas, there's Satipatthana, there's the reflecting on death and impermanence and suffering. I mean, there's so many meditations. Don't pigeonhole yourself. Don't put yourself in a small box. Open your mind to practicing in different ways and different things. And so yes, all of that to say is just, try to see what works for them. And in my experience, for a lot of older Asian Buddhists, it has been just to think about the Buddha. And that just brings so much comfort. And especially if people have worries and doubts about the future, thinking about the Buddha really calms your mind.
This is the first time I've heard about this.
Oh.
Has anyone else heard about it? Okay, it's just me. Okay.
Yeah, it's very popular in traditional Buddhist circles. And especially there's whole schools that are just dedicated to this type of practice, like Pure Land practices. They just specifically only focus on thinking about the Buddha. That's why in Japanese, they call it Nembutsu, which means Buddha-nusati, literally. Like Nembutsu means to think about the Buddha, to pay homage to the Buddha. And so it's part of Mahayana Buddhism. They kind of, there's particular schools that only focus on that as their main practice. But it's in Theravada. I mean, I've seen it when I was in Sri Lanka. I see it in Sri Lanka. I see it in the Thai community. I see it in the Burmese community. But most of the time, I feel like, at least for modern people or for Western people, they don't automatically connect with that, They kind of see like, oh, that's like magical thinking or whatever kind of excuse they make up in their mind for it, not to take it seriously. But it's a very serious practice.
I got another question.
Okay, one in the audience? Yes.
Okay. So this pretending we are in a retreat, I'm just going to ask this potential ahats.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I have been practicing white skeleton visualization,
mm-hmm.
and recently I have practicing fire castina.
Mm.
And I feel after 45 minutes or an hour later, I feel that's the most critical stages for me.
Mm.
I feel there's a fear. So this is also,
mm-hmm.
you mentioned about, this is a sequel question. This fear, I feel there's a phantom, or ghost around me,
mm-hmm.
or there's this, I don't know, just a pure fear.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder, I consulted with another friend. He says, oh, you can do bungee jumping. You can do, skydiving, get rid of that first fear. However, it's not working for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
That fear, confront that first fear. I tell myself, if the way to enlightenment is going through this insanity, and I will.
Mm.
And I just want your opinion, or this invisible direct transmission from you. It doesn't matter, whatever answer I get from you.
Okay. Yes. So there's a lot of fear along the way.
Mm.
That's a natural thing that everyone's gonna encounter, especially once we start practicing renunciation. So much fear of letting go, right? And if you become a monastic, there's a lot of fear too, right? Like you start thinking about like, well, if being a monk doesn't work out for me, then what do I do I go back to? I lost so many years of my life. Can I even go back? So there's the path of renunciation and letting go and practice. You're definitely going to face a lot of fear. So that's normal. Everyone faces fear. Different intensities, maybe different times in life, you'll have more fear than others. So that's just completely normal. In the Sri Lankan tradition, which is the one that I'm most familiar with, they tell us that there's like four ways to practice. And the first one you start off is with Buddha-nusati, thinking about the Buddha. Then once you have deep faith in the Buddha, you start practicing Metta Nusati, loving kindness, which includes compassion, altruistic joy, and equanimity, all the Brahma Viharas. From there, then you go into the body, right? Looking at the body, all the body parts and the bones and all of that. And then at the final meditation is the death, right? So if we feel some problems or some difficulties or too much fear in the death, then maybe we need to go back to just to the body parts. And if that's too difficult for us, then we need to go back to loving kindness and compassion. And if we still feel that we need to go back to the Buddha, right? So I think if we follow this kind of, it's not in the suttas, it's part of the Sri Lankan tradition. If we really kind of follow this step, this kind of like 4 recommendations of how to practice, I feel that we'll have the strength, right, and the resources, inner resources, to be able to face our fears when they arise, right? It's not about being completely fearless in the beginning. In the beginning, there's going to be fear. But again, what's our relationship? What's going to be our relationship to that fear, right? Are we going to keep feeding it? Or can we be with it?
Yes.
Yes.
Be with this.
Yeah.
Thank you, Bhante. Now it's time to end the session, but somebody already asked a question, posted a question in the chat. So do we have time for just one last question? Because this person already put the question in the chat. Is it okay?
I'm okay.
Yeah, all right. So Bhante, I feel, so this question is, Bhante, I feel you touched on parts of this topic already, where you mentioned always seeking new experiences. I'm very similar, where I'm always seeking new things, whether it's with career, travel, activities over the weekend, etc. Do you have any advice on how to balance having these desires and goals without relying on it to feel excited?
Yeah, so what worked for me was gradually replacing those experiences with more wholesome ones, right? So then my excitement to go to the club, I lived in Hollywood, to go to the Hollywood Strip, was the change to the excitement of going to the temple on Friday nights, and going on retreats, or like picking up the monks at the airport when they arrive at LAX, right? Those became my new peak experiences, right? So I changed that. And then I'm a very social person. So I always wanted to hang out with a lot of people. So then I just started doing it within like meditation circles, right? And within Buddhist circles. So it's just about knowing your tendency and being able to kind of let go of a more coarser kind of sensuality for a more refined one. And you can't do it overnight. So you might have to like do one attachment at a time, like one desire at a time, replace one at a time. And then maybe over a few years, you notice that you've changed so many of your habits, and now you get your excitement from new experiences in a wholesome way. And you can do that. I mean, now there's like so much Dhamma all over the world on the internet. There's so many temples. You can go to an exotic location on a retreat with some very good monks. So like there's ways that you can get that high and you can get that pleasure from a more wholesome place. So it's just really about changing one for another, right? And then eventually we also have to let go of that other one too, and completely let go of everything. But in the beginning, just try to pick some things and try to replace them with something else. And then over the years, just kind of let go of more of those things, and you end up with more wholesome ways to channel your wanting to have that novelty experience.
Thank you. Great answer, Bhante. So we have come to the end of the session today. Thank you so much, Bhante, for leading the session today. We are going to see Bhante again next Monday and the following Mondays. And so before we end the session tonight, would you be able to lead a dedication of merit or anything that you'd like to do, Bhante, before we close off?
Yes, well, I think I'll stick to the theme of cultivating inner compassion and kindness. So I'd like to dedicate this merit to us. You can dedicate your merit to yourself. So by the power of this merit, punya karma, may you be free from immature company, and may you always have good companions until you attain nibbana. Imina punya kamena mame bala samagamo satam samagemo hotu yavani bhana patiya.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.